All right, welcome to another episode of the Bioinformatics Lab podcast. I'm Kevin Libwit with Andrew Page. We're from Theogen, and today we're talking about social media and science, something that I'm relatively new to, by the way, mostly a lurker for the years that I've been in the field of public health. I was using Twitter to stay up to date on papers, see the various discussions, and it was always incredibly useful to see people put their papers out. If ever I had a publication, I would also toss it out there, but I was more or less a consumer of the information than a producer. It was only in the past couple of months, really, in a lot of that galvanized by starting this podcast and putting some information out about what we're doing as a group, as a company, as some of the academic collaborations we've had. I've started to dive into it a little bit more. I can't tell if it's a good time or a bad time to be now finally adopting Twitter, given all the chaos of things. But I am endlessly curious about how people are approaching social media and science. I think it's an important topic for people to consider how to get their work out, how to interface even with the broader social community outside of science is definitely a topic worth maybe touching on a little bit. But you've been a little bit more active on social media and podcasts over the past couple of years. So what's your perspective on things, how you've got in it, grown your audience, disseminated information, and how things are changing maybe over the past couple of years?
Yeah, well, I guess I never set out to be a celebrity or anything like that, nor am I. Um, but I found social media to be very useful, like academically and just for myself, keeping up with everything that goes on because we're in a very rapidly changing field. You know, it's not like we're in a boring old stale subject that doesn't change. It's changing so fast that keeping up is a challenge, and so I've used social media to do that. And in the olden days, like if you wanted to keep up to date with papers, people would, literally go and read the table of contents of the journal issue that came out, every month on a physical piece of paper, physical copy. They don't make them anymore, I don't think. But because everything's PDFs online. Um, but that's kind of how people would keep up to date and find new papers, Whereas now it's been years since I've looked at that, maybe 20 years. Like now what you do is you go on social media and people are posting or boosting papers and it's like, oh, that looks interesting. Or people mention something on Slack. And that's how I get 99% of my papers these days is, passively just you see something interesting or people make interesting points. And yeah, it's very useful. So what I've been doing for past years is making sure all my papers are open access. So it usually is preprints first and then, obviously publish later. And then, making sure people actually understand what it is, telling them about it, and maybe highlighting a few key points and going from there. Because if you're just, pushing out something into, a big pile with hundreds of thousands of other papers, no one's going to notice it. And you have to make that little bit of extra effort to say to people who you think might be interested in or might find it useful that, hey, we did this nice bit of work and here you go.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. What I'm hearing too is there's participation in maybe two broad categories of consumption and production. And even just on the consumption side, I think when I was getting really into social media was when I was in my graduate program as a master's student. I was reading a ton of papers. I was following a couple really influential, maybe I would call it, scientists in the field who were really, high production, putting their papers out. And then they would also often retweet or highlight other papers that were out. So it was like you could follow relatively few people who would be your access to the entire field. And I never did what you described. I never looked at the papers, table of contents, and read the articles and like picked my favorite paper based on the titles or anything like that. It was more so somebody would highlight a paper. Oh, this is antimicrobial resistance pathogen pathogen plasmid genomics. Check out this new technique, check out this wet lab assay, look at this new GitHub repo and things like that. And that's how I was kind of introduced to a lot of the literature that I've seen. And that was how I saw Twitter. It was like I can look at scientific discussions. And often I saw it used to be our little corner of the Twitter universe there, where there was a lot of scientific discussions happening all of the time. And live conference tweeting was also unbelievable. Like there was always somebody. I have a couple people I can shout out specifically. Keith Robeson, for example. He's in the Boston area in the startup world. I believe he's currently at Ginkgo, but he had both a blog, Omics, and then a Twitter account, and he would live tweet conferences that I wish I had could attend. It was like, man, I was like sitting right there, and I knew the authors to follow and the papers to follow up on, and see the different emerging research in our field. So as a consumptive side of it, that is where I saw that was my first access. And then just exactly like you said, now being on the producer side of it, it's like I'm almost trying to pay that back a little bit of like, okay, I'll retweet papers I see when I highlight,
Yeah.
when I see things like our colleagues do, or just interesting profiles of either blog posts or in-depth research in the field. I'll also retweet that, maybe make a little commentary so people can see what's happening. I'm still very much naive, nascent stage in terms of producing content there, but that's how I've approached Twitter, or X as it's now named.
Absolutely. So yeah, obviously the X thing is a huge
Yeah,
conversation in its own right. We'll come on to that in a second, but I really like the fact that we have a community online. We can actually
yeah,
tap into controversies in real time, as well as, the good stuff as well. What is super cool and just out, and the exploding paper that is gonna, change things or set the agenda for next while. And does happen every now and again. And you could see, say, in the early days of pandemic as well, there's a lot on Twitter and a lot in social media, which good actually. The early signals were not the kind of crazies, COVID deniers or whatever. It was actually the scientists sharing data saying, hey, this is a problem, and here's the data. And, it was very, very, like a very good way of getting information out very, very fast. And then obviously there's more private communities, which I roll into these, large Slack groups that, of people who are very specialist and sharing data there as well and sharing information. So that's quite useful. But, with the whole X.com and Twitter implosion, it's kind of fragmented everything actually.
yeah.
And so like I'm on Mastodon and I'm on
Blue
Blue
Sky. Yeah,
Sky and on Twitter, and sometimes have to post on all three of them just to get the message out there. And my God, it's crazy. But
yeah,
what I do like Blue Sky actually, because it's like what Twitter used to be 10 years ago, none of the kind of trolls or bots or anything like that. It's very much focused, like super laser sharp focused on science, with certain people I follow. And I have a much smaller follower base, or people I follow and people that follow me, but it's vastly higher quality. So, it's quality over quantity, and it's insanely good. So I'd say check out Blue Sky. At the moment, I think it's invite only, but if you ask around, you can find an invite pretty easily. And yeah, that's kind of my go-to now for papers and things.
and that's exactly why I opened with, I can't tell if it's a good or a bad time to be jumping into the producing side of social media in science, because Twitter feels a bit quiet and sparse now, and like I'm seeing just more than anything announcements of people, hey, I'm leaving Twitter, find me on Blue Sky, find me on Mastodon, which
Yeah.
is totally reasonable. It's been a bit vitriolic on the science conversation side. We know some people personally who've been impacted by those conversations that are just uh, yeah, horrifically social in terms of the feedback they're getting there. So I understand that move. I wish more people would stay in the Twitter space because of how large the audience is. I guess it depends on what the intent is. Is it you want to speak with other scientists in that community? Then I think exactly what you said, being in the Slack spaces or maybe even Blue Sky would be the move. And I find myself having an affinity towards that route as well. But we need some scientists to stay in the fray of like, how do you get people who can reasonably speak? And I think that's what's difficult. A lot of us, we came in with exactly the intent you're speaking about. Let me find the other scientists, speak about the other science with the other scientists, discuss nuanced topics, disagree. I've even seen proper disagreements happening in Twitter threads in the past. But then when that meets the interface of non-scientific communities, where maybe the communication form is rules are completely different, it's like, the hell is this? I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for somebody, ad hominem attacks and questioning funding sources and all these things. And it's like, it makes you want to just sort of retreat. Like, this is not the forum I signed up for. But as I said, I feel like some scientific voices, it benefits the large space if there's some scientific space voices that maintain there, but it's a big burden to carry, as we've seen
Yeah.
as a person.
What worries me sometimes actually is, we're maybe focused on Twitter and things like that, but actually there's other social networks out there that people use. So
Yes.
like occasionally I'll post on LinkedIn, because actually there's a totally different community who are relevant, who use LinkedIn, as their major source of information. And then you have like the Facebook. Uh, I don't use it personally anymore,
Yeah.
but a different generation use it as well. I don't know. I think it's old people at this point, and
And then if we
so
go to
you
the
miss
other
that.
spectrum, it's TikTok is probably the younger people. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Like TikTok and Instagram and things like that. That's for a younger generation than me. I'm not either of them. But I think, well, are we missing out something? Are we missing out, huge and entire generations of people because we're
Yeah.
focused on I guess Twitter, and maybe that's for middle to late career people, and actually maybe we should be looking at the early career people who are actually on all these other social networks. So yeah, I I don't know the answer to that, but maybe we'll deploy you, as our TikTok dancer.
And I'll put our toe in the water there. But I think actually, as we're speaking about it, I think this is probably a good thing to have those options, to have those different types of rooms and forums for communication. And so you know what to expect. If you're going to walk into the Twitter universe or the X universe, you know what to expect. And so you walk into that not necessarily thinking, oh, Andrew and I are going to be having a fantastic conversation. We'll disagree a bit, and it'll be a room for that. It's like, no, this is going to, the large audience. You don't know who's going to read it. You don't know who's going to reply. You don't know who's going to pick it up and misinterpret it and all those things. And that's that space. Whereas actually, like you said, I found it really helpful posting things on LinkedIn because it's more of a professional forum. This is what people are there for. You're not saying that same level of I don't know what to call it, like liberal discussion, not liberal in this like free. I'm using euphemisms for what you would describe X as.
But people are professional. They're not.
Professional is probably the best way to describe it.
They're usually posting in a professional capacity, or their company is actually on LinkedIn and can see everything they post, so they have to moderate a little bit, self-moderate.
A bit more buttoned up is maybe, and yeah, so there's a
Conservative.
decorum there that people are using. So there's all these different forms, and I would even say like GitHub has become a bit of a social media in its own right, especially when I was looking at like Pangolin, and when I was looking at Pangolin issues and pull requests in the past, it was like, man, these are fantastic posts. I'm keeping up with the science by looking up,
Yeah.
watching people submit new variants and things like that. So it's like there's different forums there, and I know people from their GitHub issues or pull requests and all these. So if you want to go super technical, that's become its own social media sphere as well. And people even use like the little commit profiles. It's like a little bit of a social badge. Yeah,
But
the green
I
dots in your
actually
commit history.
I just realized that I've got 132 followers on GitHub. I didn't even
Oh,
know you
see,
could
look at
follow
that.
people.
You're
Yeah, I didn't
famous
even
on
know you could
GitHub
follow
as well.
people.
You're like in the thousands on X there too. Is Blue Sky? What is the audience volume there too? Is similar
Uh,
size or?
I've a couple thousand on X, but actually, I think Blue Sky is, maybe 10% of that, but it's much higher
Yeah.
quality. And it's
Mm,
often the same people. There's a huge overlap, but it's high quality, and they're real active people as well because
that's the
you
big
see it
thing
very
too. Yeah.
quickly. And yeah, I'm definitely a Blue Sky convert in this case. There's also Mastodon as well. So there's Mastodon.science, which is run by Nabil Farid Ali Khan, who does podcasts with me, and
Yes.
Duncan Cannell and Emma Hycroft. So, and Lee Katz as well. And so, yeah, there's different avenues, for to see different people. And so you don't have to stay with the stodgy old, X.com, which is
Yeah.
quickly dying, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's becoming less inviting to the conversations I think we're seeking is what I can confidently say. I don't know anything about the user base or the audience that their developers are seeking, but I think in terms of the discussions that we're searching for, it doesn't feel like that's the forum. So Blue Sky, you'll probably see. I know you're posting more on Blue Sky. I'm on there a little bit. Every now and then I'll post something or re sky something. I don't know the verb
I don't know.
in that space, but yeah, I think that's a pretty good picture of where things are at right now. It's almost like a speciation event we're watching. We're watching different environmental
Yeah.
pressures come into the environment and watching how things adapt. So, and it's happening in real time. So those are really the ones to keep, I think, most in mind is, X, of course, Blue Sky, Mastodon, the different Slack channels. I'm an advocate for GitHub as a social media platform. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how people continue to deal with this. I think this is probably something that, to some extent, in even university settings, people are going to be talking about. Like, there's an ethics conversation, there's a scientific communication component. It's becoming an inarguable part of people's career profile at this point, even if we're just talking LinkedIn alone. So yeah, I'm glad we had this episode on this. Probably first of many, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kevin.
All right, we'll see you in the next one.